Lions fans, what is going on? Welcome to the Lions Pulse. I am your host, Miko. And in today's video, we are going to do something that is, something that I've kind of promised you guys last week, which is that we are going to break down and kind of go over the Lions' first loss of the NFL season. Not to mention, there was some injury news that came out late last night that basically had the entire fan base uh, kind of in their feelings in some way or another. And so I'm going to give my thoughts on that. I'm going to give my thoughts on what I think the options the Lions have in terms of replacing some of the injured bodies that they have. And ultimately, like, again, I get that a lot of us are probably like in our feelings. We're probably feeling like the sky is falling a little bit with so many injuries at key places hitting the Lions this early in the season. But ultimately, I do still think this team is going to be okay. I do think this team is still going to be able to find ways to win games. And I think the biggest thing that we have to kind of remember as well is that this is still really early in the season. And the Lions still can find options. They can still go out and find bodies in free agency or on practice squads and be able to plug holes so that they can continue to kind of keep this machine kind of rolling. So with all that said, as I see people kind of coming in, please do me the biggest favor, hit that like button. Also, if you're not subscribed to this channel, please be sure to hit that subscribe button. And then once you've done all those things, jump into the chat so I know who's hanging out with me tonight. It is a little bit of a later stream. I'm not sure how long I'll be on here. Probably not too late because it's already like 8:30. But with all that said, I want to kind of jump into the main topic of this discussion, which is first and foremost, uh I wanted to kind of focus first on the news of CJGJ because that's the most recent news, and then we can kind of go back and kind of talk about the game as a whole and talk about some of the things that like have me really concerned and some of the things that I think are probably being a little blown out of proportion by some people in the fan base. But when talking about CJGJ, look, let's be honest, that's news that cut me to the core. If you've watched any of my videos over the last few months, especially during the off season, ever since CJ got here, I've been a big supporter of CJ's and kind of with that belief that CJ's energy, CJ's presence was going to be a big factor in helping this defense kind of climb out of the hole that they were in last year and start to be more of a force in the NFL. And I think in the first game of the season, we kind of saw that. And I think even throughout camp and just seeing like his energy in the locker room and in interviews, you could just feel that things were a little bit different, with the Lions and just how they were carrying themselves. So to lose a guy like that, potentially for what it sounds like, could be for the entire season. Dan Campbell went on 97.1 today and kind of said that, there is a possibility that he might be able to come back later in the season. I don't know if he means like, the last couple weeks or if he's talking like in the sense of if the Lions make a playoff push, maybe CJ can come back for a playoff game or something like that. But losing a player like that hurts. Like there's no way around it when you kind of start to go. I mean, again, it's only 2 games into the season, but when you start to kind of go through, where CJ kind of ranks on this Lions team in terms of stats, in terms of impact, he's near the top in a number of different categories. When you start talking about tackles, he's tied at the top of the list in tackles with Alex Anzalone, and I believe Derek Barnes as well. Uh, and so there's a number of things that CJ has been doing really well for this team. And so to lose again a leader, not just emotionally, but somebody on the field that's going out there making plays, hurts in a big way. He's, again, 2 games into the season, he has the most passes defended already for the Lions with 2 of those. Like I said, he's tied at the top with tackles. So it's him, Jerry Jacobs, and CJ Gardner Johnson and Derek Barnes, all with 13 tackles through 2 games so far. And so again, you're losing a guy who honestly, I think that was probably one of the biggest things that I noticed from CJ in these first 2 games is how good he's been in run support and being able to come down from that safety spot and get tackles for loss or get tackles and limiting the amount of rushing yards that running backs were able to get. So again, to lose that is going to hurt your defense in some form or fashion. But I think it's something that again that Dan Campbell kind of brought up today while talking 97.1, which is they still do have Tracy Walker, and having Tracy available to you and having him as your next man up at that safety position is a great place to be in if you're the Lions, because if not for that Achilles injury to Tracy last year, I think he was on pace to have a really good year. I think he was really going to kind of show why he deserved that contract extension. He was going to kind of showcase why he was voted as a captain. And so obviously, the injury kind of slowed him a bit. And obviously the emergence of Brian Branch and having someone like CJGJ available to you, yeah, kind of pushed Tracy down the depth chart a bit. But I think he's in good position to, again, kind of pick up where he left off. I don't think there's anything that CJ was doing like on the field as far as being able to come up and run support, being able to blitz, being able to still drop in coverage. I don't think that those are things that Tracy can't do. I think he's very capable of filling in, and this defense won't have to change drastically from what it's asking their safeties to do, because I think Tracy is just that type of safety. I think he can do all of those things, maybe not nearly as well as CJGJ, but I think he can do them very comparably. And to the point where we won't notice a huge drop off. One of the things that I loved most about Tracy, even last year before he got hurt, was one of the things that CJ's been doing really well, which is, well, like I said, coming up in run support and being able to be that guy to come down from the safety spot and be able to get tackles for losses or be able to put pressure on the quarterback. I thought he was really starting to come into his own in that way. So it does. It sucks that CJ's, going to miss so much of the season, possibly the entire season. But that's one thing when you know that you have a viable backup in Tracy Walker, somebody that the Lions had enough confidence in to pay, enough confidence to keep him around and not try to trade him. It speaks volumes to what you probably have as far as, again, in that next man up mentality. Um, Really quick, want to just, give a couple shout outs to a couple people in the chat. Um, Hatter's House 710 saying, "Go Lions, what's good with you, Hatter's House?" And then my guy Dan Pask also in the chat. Dan, I know you were streaming a little while ago, so I'm glad to see that you're more than willing to come and jump and join and support my stream as well. So I appreciate you for that. But yeah, anybody else that's watching, feel free to jump into the chat if you have questions. If there's something I say that you disagree with. Again, this is a safe space. Feel free to kind of, again, express your frustrations, express your concerns, because again, I get that there may be people that maybe again, Lions suffer their first loss. They're dealing with a ton of injuries. I get why some people may be kind of panicked. Because again, even when the CJGJ news dropped last night, I was in a place where I was like, you know what? I can't even talk about it right now. Like, there's just too much going on for me to be able to wrap my mind around the fact that the Lions won't have one of their better defensive players, going, available to them for the rest of the season. And so now, again, I've been able to take a day. I've been able to kind of decompress and really kind of work through how I'm feeling about this. And I really did take a step back and kind of realize, you know what? This team is going to be fine. This team has a coaching staff that I believe in. This team has players and they have depth. While that depth is being chipped at, but I do believe they have depth at some key places that they can still tap into. And I think while some players are being moved to IR, we know that Josh Pascal got moved to IR last week, or at least before the Seattle game. Obviously, James Houston got moved to IR after suffering his fractured ankle. He's going to be out for 6 to 8 weeks. And now, the whole injury to CJGJ, there's a lot of shuffling going on, but I do believe it gives an opportunity for some of these players that are still available to kind of, again, rally and understand like, hey, more is required of you. And I think that's where I want to kind of start to transition into the game that took place this past Sunday, right? Between the Lions and the Seahawks. And the thing that I guess if I had to start somewhere and talk about what had me the most disappointed, it is the performance of this defensive line. And it's the performance that we're getting out of the interior of that defensive line. And I'm going to say it, I'm still somewhat disappointed in Aiden Hutchinson. I know he's leading, or at least like tied for the lead in pressures in the NFL, through 2 games, but those pressures haven't really converted into much, especially when you start to look at last game. Aiden got credited with 6 pressures, but it just didn't feel like those pressures ever really translated into anything. It didn't really affect plays. It didn't really, lead to Seattle not being able to operate their offense effectively. And so when I start to look at that entire defensive line, Aiden probably has the best excuse probably built in the fact that like he is being doubled, he is being chipped. You can see that throughout this, the tape throughout the tape from Sunday's game, is that again, there's a lot of times where even when it looks like he's about to have a one-on-one matchup, the guard peels back and gets a really good chip on him. Like he got put on the turf a number of times because the Seattle Seahawks put a lot of attention on making sure that he couldn't, be a disruptive force. And the same thing was kind of true with Charles Harris. Again, if it wasn't Aiden, it was sometimes often Charles Harris also being doubled. And so that's where, while not, again, I still expect more out of those two edge rushers, it does kind of start to zero in my focus into the middle of that defensive line, where you have guys like Aline, where you have guys like Benito Jones, and you have guys like Levi. And again, out of those interior guys, Levi is probably the only one that has like somewhat of an excuse because again, he's just now kind of getting his feet under him and starting to kind of get his rhythm back as far as playing football at a competitive level. But Aleem was somebody who once again was getting hyped up this offseason about, hey, he's down 20 pounds. He looks more athletic. He looks more explosive. 2 games into the season, I have yet to see it. And I'm just being very honest with you guys. I have yet to see anything from Aleem that makes me believe that he's taking a leap, that he's, that him being slimmer is somehow translating into better performances. It just doesn't seem like that. The dude didn't register a stat in the most previous game. Like, I get that he plays defensive tackle and like you may not always get, a sack or a pressure or something, but like you should at least be in on some assisted tackles. Like the fact that he wasn't even in on those, and you go back and you watch the tape and you realize like, hey, there's opportunities for him where he has one-on-ones and he's not winning them. He's not doing enough to be able to be a force in the game. And so of the things that I'm concerned about, like I know there's injuries, there's people that are upset about coaching decisions, there's people upset about the turnovers. The turnovers are definitely a concern as well. Not a concern, but the turnovers are definitely to blame, for how this game turned out. But the lack of performance from this interior defensive line is something that like, hey, I'm starting to kind of like my eyebrows are starting to perk up a little bit because it's like, hey, this doesn't look good. This is not the kind of football that you need from this interior line if you're expecting to win games. So that's one thing that I've been kind of frustrated about. But let me kind of jump in here in the chat because a bunch of you jumped in here at once. So I want to make sure I give you guys your proper shout outs. Debt Famine in the chat saying also here just saying hello. So appreciate you jumping in the chat saying hello. Perry saying, hey Miko, how are you? I'm good, man. Appreciate you stopping by. Brandon Kerr with the wave saying Miko. I'll wave back. I'll wave back. Say what's good with you, Brandon. Appreciate you stopping through, man. Dan saying, you bet, Miko. Did Jack Campbell play more in the second half to you? I wasn't sure if it was a factor. I do feel like I saw more of Jack and less of Malcolm. And I don't know. I might be in the minority of this. I might not. I will say this. I feel like whenever I see a linebacker give up a play that I don't like so far in the season, I feel like it's been Malcolm. I feel like every time that's happened, it's been Malcolm, and it's a play that makes me like just shake my head like you should know better. You should be in better position. I feel like Jack is doing well though. I think Derek's playing really well, and so therefore it's not like I don't think it's going to make it very difficult for Jack to get more snaps than what he's currently getting. But when he is in there, he's making an impact. He's showing that he's not like over his head, in my opinion. So he's somebody that I wish that they would give more snaps to, especially if Alex is just going to be so focused on his assignment that he's not going to read and react, and he's not going to understand, how to make adjustments based off of what's happening in front of him. Because that play where Kenneth Walker basically like had an open lane and only Jack reacted the right way and Alex basically like booked it to cover the flat, that irritated me beyond belief because that's your veteran. Like he of all people should know like, hey, I need to read this situation before I decide to just bail into coverage. And so that really frustrated me. But I do think Jack is playing a little bit better. I hope he is playing more, as the season kind of goes along. Damian Smith in the chat saying, hey, Miko, some of draft Twitter says that AG wants to run defense as if he had dudes. Do you think that's true, or do you think they have to be his dudes? So I think I kind of said it going into this season, right? I didn't think AG would have an excuse this year because I think he has enough quality players to make this defense be respectable, right? To be a defense that doesn't have teams constantly scoring 30 over him, that he's able to contain the run, that he's able to put together like effective schemes to be able to, again, neutralize what opposing offenses want to do. And I think for this Seattle game, I think there are some things here and there that you can kind of nitpick about AG, some of the decisions, specifically like the decision to play so much off coverage. I have no problem with him playing zone. I do have a problem with him playing that much off coverage because basically Seattle just picked them apart by throwing a bunch of underneath routes. Like they were like, if you want to cover deep, that's fine. We'll run these shallow, routes in the flat or these slants or these crossers and just pick you apart that way. That irritated me, but I think his overall game plan was a solid one. Choosing to go more zone than man was a smart decision because the two times that they ran like straight man, you saw what happened. Gino tucked it and ran for first downs both times. And it was just like, okay, that's not, they don't need to be doing that, but they do need to be probably playing a little bit more press coverage in these zone schemes. Um, but I think AG has enough. I think his players are letting him down. To be completely honest with you, I think guys like Aleem, I think guys like Benito Jones, I'll say it, like I said, I think Aiden's kind of not living up to it. 13 pressures are great. Like it looks nice in a stat sheet. It basically lets you know, like, hey, you are trying to have an impact on the game. But other players have 13 pressures as well, and they have sacks to go along with them. And I know he's only in his second year, and maybe it's not quite fair to compare him to the likes of a TJ Watt or a Micah Parsons, but he was drafted above those guys. And so the expectation is that he puts out a performance, at least going into his second year, that again starts to rival their performances. And so the fact that he's not getting sack numbers, the fact that he's not getting a bunch of tackles for loss, it's not a huge deal. I think Aiden's going to have one of those games, and it could be as soon as this week where he has one of those multi-sack games. But through 2 games, yeah, it's been a little disappointing. The fact that he's not able to get home on a lot of his rushes. He's had a couple rushes as well that, again, I haven't seen enough people talk about it, but he's had some sloppy rushes as well. Dan Campbell kind of talked about it in his press conference after, I believe it was yesterday, where he was like, hey, there was a couple guys where you're expecting them to do their job or you're expecting them to be reliable and they're not doing it. Aiden was the first person that kind of came to mind because I think there are times when he's doing the perfect thing, absolutely. But then there are other times where I think he's trying to make a play, and when he's trying to make a play, he sometimes takes himself out of the play. And he's had a couple rushes where he's rushed wide, and the tackles are just letting him rush wide. Like that's fine. Like if you're not going to try and stop on a dime and cut back through, like I'm just going to let you try to think that you can loop around me and think that you're going to get to this quarterback who's going to throw the ball in basically 2 seconds. It's little things like that. And I don't mean to harp on him as like he's the problem, because I don't think he's the problem on the defensive line. But if Dan Campbell can sit here and say like, hey, there are guys that we are expecting more out of and they're not living up to it, I think it's fair for us as a fan base to look at Aiden and say, hey, we see you out here working, but there still should be a higher expectation from you going into year 2. Again, we're 2 games into the season. You don't have a sack. You don't even have half a sack. It's a problem. Perry, I feel like I just kind of answered that question there, right? Like, what is my big worry from the game? It's that. It's the defensive line. It's their lack of pressure. It's their lack of, specifically against the pass, because I think they've been great against the run. Like 2 games into the season, you haven't allowed a 100-yard rusher. You haven't allowed a team to go over 100 yards rushing. That's great. That's phenomenal. And that's a credit to your defensive line, but it's also a credit to your entire defense because, like I said at the top of the show, you have, I think, 4 players with 13 tackles this far into the season. That's CJGJ, Alex Anzalone, Derek Barnes, and I believe Jerry Jacobs. Like, so you're getting contributions from every level of your defense, but then your defensive line is doing a good job of, again, not giving up, big holes for running backs to kind of run through. So, but I'm still, like I said, I'm still concerned about the lack of pass rush and the lack of pressure that they're being able to put on quarterbacks. Um, Det Fan Man saying, so end of last year, Holmes told us he needed to add D line because he needed to give Bugs less snaps. Turns out he just kept him inactive and ran it back, and inner D line needs help. Listen, I feel like that has to be a conversation, right? You decided to go with Benito Jones over Isaiah Bugs. Listen, if that's what you guys saw on tape, that Benito was having a better performance than Isaiah Bugs, cool. I'm all fine for it. But when neither of those guys, when Benito and Aleem aren't doing anything, yeah, I think Benito needs to go back and be the one that's inactive, and at least Isaiah Bugs needs an opportunity to come up and start to be able to make plays, because what you've currently been running with isn't working. I'm at the point, activate Broderick Martin too. Like, because this is I'm gonna go back to Aleem. This is year 3 for Aleem. And I feel like every year since his rookie year, we've been talking about, hey, this is going to be a breakout year for Aleem. This is going to be like, we're going to see a better version of Aleem because he's going to have this person next to him, or he's just been working this hard. And we just haven't seen it. We've seen it in one game against the Giants, and that's it. At some point in time, Aleem has to be held accountable. Like, hey, if you're not going to make an impact on the game, then we're better off just not activating you. We're going to give somebody else an opportunity to make plays for this defense. Brandon saying one is that the Lions actually did overcome 3 turnovers by tying the game at the end of regulation, but I think their defense was gassed. This is the thing, right? Because I have a hard time. Like, I have an issue with, again, pass rush and amount of pressure that they put on the Seattle Seahawks, and specifically like how they weren't able to take advantage of 2 backup tackles. But for the most part, when you go back and watch that game, Lions were in control despite the defense not being like overly, imposing. They were still controlling that game, and it was going at a pace where you were like, okay, if the Lions keep marching up and down the field, they'll be able, like, coming out of halftime, they'll be able to get a 2 touchdown lead potentially, and you'll feel really good about where this team is. And maybe eventually Seattle will start to have to play a more predictable style of offense. That's where turnovers kind of, like, again, flipped everything on its head, because instead of you being able to go up by 2 touchdowns, now you're tied. And credit to the offense, credit to Jared Goff, because he had an amazing game. They were able to get that lead back, but the dynamics of the game immediately, like, it just flipped. Nothing really felt it. It immediately went from them feeling like they were in control to all of a sudden feeling like, okay, now they can't afford to make another mistake because I feel like this game is going to go the opposite way. And lo and behold, Goff throws a pick 6, and now you're playing catch up. And credit does need to go to the offense for being able to, again, get the game tied and push it to overtime. But it just feels like if the defense had been given an opportunity to all of a sudden become more aggressive after after they maybe go up by 2 scores, whether that's 2 touchdowns or just go up by 10, maybe things just look a little differently in that game. Um, Brandon also saying too, and Brian Branch actually kind of referred to this in an earlier interview, that the noise was supposed to affect the Seahawks. I think it actually affected their defense as far as communication. And I don't know. I think there's a part of it where, again, there's always give and take with certain types of coverage and certain styles of defense you decide to play. Like I said, I don't think playing man coverage was going to be a good idea for the Lions in this game. I think it would have just opened up more opportunities for Geno to just be able to run for first downs and things like that. But a drawback to zone is that when you're able to run those types of crossing routes, there's pockets in zones, right? Like, and all you need is enough time for your receivers to get into those pockets. So when your defensive line isn't getting pressure, the quarterback is basically able to just sit back there, wait until his receiver gets into the proper zone, sits in that zone, and he can deliver passes. And again, Seattle has a lot of veteran savvy wide receivers and tight ends over there. You go back and you literally go back and watch what the Rams did to Seattle. It's basically the same thing that Seattle did to us. Matthew Stafford got to just sit back there, wait till his receivers got into zone, like crossed into certain pockets and zones, and got them the ball. And then Seattle just never really was able to adjust from that, and because they weren't ever able to get consistent pressure on Stafford. The same thing was true for the Lions. They were never able to get consistent pressure on Geno, so Geno can just sit back there, wait till his guys gets into certain zones, waits until guys drop, again, possibly a question mark on AG's strategy, where again he's having Jerry Jacobs consistently drop in what seems like a cover 3 type of coverage. So now there's a lot of just open space in the flat. Those are just easy, just again, dump offs, and then you get 5-6 yards. And next thing you know, you're in third and manageables, and it's easier to pick up those third downs. Specifically more so in the second half. Shout out to my guy Luke saying, I get so happy when you're live. Listen, man, it's been a minute. I have to try and find time. I'm trying to make more time to be live. But But no, let me I know you got a couple comments in here, so I want to jump into this one. I see that you disagree with something. So you said I disagree with the Aleem take. He's doing his job and better than the outside guys. No one was looking for Aleem to get sacks, but they were from Aiden. And I'm not necessarily expecting him to get sacks, but I'm expecting him to be disruptive. I'm expecting him to win his one-on-ones. Like if they're going to double on the outside, you have a one-on-one. Win your one-on-one. I don't need you to necessarily get a sack, but I need you to disrupt the play. Like we hear it all the time. Pressure up the middle is the worst pressure for a quarterback. And when your defensive tackles aren't able to get off of single blocks, what are we doing? Like I'm not trying to make it seem like Aleem should be playing like Quentin Williams, but again, you're given one-on-ones multiple times throughout a game. I need you to win a couple of those. I don't need you to win all of them, but I need you to win a few of those. And I've seen him do it. That's the other part of it that's frustrating about Aleem. We've seen Aleem be quick off the snap. We've seen him be disruptive in a game before. It's the question of why can't he do it consistently? And maybe this answer is as simple as like, hey, he's just not that good. He's just not that caliber of player. But if that's the case, then maybe we need to stop hyping Aleem up like that every offseason, that he's going to make this big jump. And maybe he just won't. Let me see. Perry saying, Miko, do you think the Lions should throw the rookies into the fire and let them learn and make their mistakes, or do you want them to bring them along slow? Perry, I'm a big proponent of learning on the job. Like literally, you drafted some of these players high. Sam's thriving, being thrown to the fire. I think in a weird way, like, and I hate to say this because David Montgomery was playing great. I think Demo getting hurt might be the best thing for Jahmyr Gibbs because I think it's going to force the Lions to just give him the ball. I get it. They're trying to play like, hey, we want to protect him. We want to, make sure he has a long and healthy career. He needs touches. He needs to be able to adjust to the actual flow of a game. He needs to be able to understand how to play off his offensive linemen. You can't keep doing that by just giving him a couple touches here and there and speaking to the fact of like, well, we're trying to ease him along slowly. Easing him along slowly might cost you games at this point. Like now that David Montgomery is hurt and he's going to be out probably for a couple weeks, doing that process might cost you games. And I think Jahmyr just needs that opportunity to get 15 touches, 15 carries, not even just 15 touches, 15 carries. So probably north of 20 to 25 touches in a game so that he can start to get into a rhythm so that you can really start to utilize every skill set that he has and not just, again, limit him to just outside runs or just limiting to him to a couple swing passes or things like that. I will give them credit. Like the slant route that he had that he dropped as they were like kind of going into halftime, that was like that's more stuff that I want to see them doing with him, right? Like don't just line him up in the slot, like line him up out wide and let him run real routes. But when David Montgomery got hurt, I was really frustrated that the run style completely changed. Like I don't think those plays were working just because David Montgomery was running them. I believe those run plays were working because the blocking scheme played to the strength of your offensive line and your offensive line was able to move people out the way. When you stopped doing that and you were just like, oh, we're just going to try and use Jahmyr Gibbs' speed on the outside. I said it when I broke down the Seahawks tape against the Rams. Those linebackers are athletic. You were not going to out athlete them on the edges over and over and over again, like not without setting them up on the inside. And so once Jahmyr came in, it felt like they were kind of cued in, like, oh, these are the things that they want to do with him. It's going to be a lot of inside zone, or it's going to be a lot of, tosses to the outside, or they're going to try to get him on the edges. And it's like, no, just run the same play that you ran with David Montgomery. Your linemen were getting on blocks, they were creating gaps. Jahmyr's got enough speed and enough vision to be able to run those plays. Same with Jack. I think Jack is getting enough touches. Like I think, and it's not because I don't think like Jack could probably use some more, but it's going to have to come at the cost of Alex Anzalone. And I don't think they're ready to do that 2 games into the season. I think if Jack continues to play well, probably by like the halfway point, you're going to see Alex's snap count go down. I think Derek Barnes is going to continue to be on the field because he really has, of all the players, let me like pause for a second. Of all the players that we heard of in the offseason that was like making the jump, I don't think there's a player I can think of that has been more true to that than Derek Barnes. Derek Barnes was getting hyped up as like, yo, he is so much better than he was his first 2 years in the league, and I believe he's actually lived up to it. There's been a couple other players that we highlighted that I spoke of, and I was like, "Hey, this is what I'm hearing. These are that are really standing out." It just hasn't quite resonated yet. Again, 2 games into the season, there's still plenty of opportunities for these players to get things together, but as of right now, Derek Barnes is the only one that's currently living up to the hype that we were hearing about, um, in training camp. Dark Dark Elf pointed this out. So yeah, this is what I'm talking about as far as like how terrible this interior offensive line was, right? PFF grades. And again, I'm not a huge PFF grade, but I think PFF can, if PFF grades line up with what your eyes are telling you, it's easier to trust the grades. And Levi, Aleem, and Benito having those scores that you're seeing on the screen are a true testament of just how bad they were. And just again, not not doing enough to really make this game um difficult for the Seahawks. Let me see who else we got in here. Luke with the AKA Greek yogurt when in regards to Aiden. And listen, man, I'm trying to be patient with Aiden. I'm trying to give him opportunities because I think he is going to I do think he'll get there. I do think he's going to have one of those big games. But I haven't moved off of my stance that like Aiden probably won't ever be more than a 12 sack guy. Like that's who he is to me. And it's not me hating on him. It's really just taking inventory of how he plays the position. He doesn't have amazing strength at the point of attack. He doesn't have ridiculous bend, but he is relentless. He is a guy that, when he understands and puts together a really good pass rush set, he can get there. He has enough in his toolkit to be a guy that can get 10 to 12 sacks a year. And if you start putting him on the inside more, I think those numbers become easier because what they did against Kansas City, putting him on the inside, he looked fantastic. I don't think they'll ever move him there full time because I don't think they want him to have to put on that type of size and they don't want him to have to take on those types of run blocks. But on pass it down situations, oh, he is a nightmare for guards to have to deal with if he's rushing from the inside. And so the problem is though, when you go up against a Seahawks team and you're not getting them in enough of those situations, it's going to be difficult to set up those mismatches. And now that James Houston is hurt, now that Julian Okwara is still on IR, and now that Josh Pascal is on IR, I do think it's going to be a while until we start to see Aiden kicking inside more. But it is one of his strengths. Like I don't want to make it seem like I'm just like that disappointed in him. It's just on the outside, rushing from the outside, yes, he's been a little disappointing. When he's on the inside, he's been great. Um, Brandon saying it seems to me that the interior D line is the last unit that really needs to be addressed through free agency or the draft next year. And I think so. I mean, this is the thing that's going to be weird though, right? If the defense keeps being this strong against the run, I do think that's going to continue to push the need or the desire for this, for Brad Holmes and this coaching staff to go feel like, oh, we need someone strong in the defensive line. I do think there's a part of it to to give Luke credit for what he was saying earlier about like, hey, Aleem's doing his job. There may be a part of this coaching staff, or there may be people on this coaching staff like, hey, Aleem's doing what we asked him to do, which is hold up at the point of attack. However, Dan Campbell did also say in his press conference, hey, some of these guys need to be able to transition from run to pass a lot quicker. And so if that becomes a knock on a guy like Aleem or on Levi or on Benito, like, hey, you guys aren't transitioning from run stopping to pass rush quick enough, I could see them basically be like, yo, we're gonna go find somebody that will do that. And whether that's in free agency or in the draft. The thing about the draft, and I don't mind this about Brad Holmes. I know other people hate it. Brad Holmes has been adamant. They do not draft for position. They draft based off of players they need. So if they don't see a defensive tackle that they love and they believe is actually going to come in here and make this team better, as much as we may yell and holler about it, it just might not happen. Like, and I've gotten to the point where I've just like hands off the wheel in that regard. Like it just might not happen. They might not go out and get a Jalen Carter type. Or maybe Jalen Carter is a horrible example because I don't know if there will ever be another Jalen Carter. But you know what I'm saying? Like, I don't know if that's ever going to be high on their priority list where they're like, hey, we absolutely need a stout interior D lineman. Um, let's see. Luke saying they're not doubling outside, and if Aleem is not getting if Aleem is not getting it done, talk to the GM. No, I'm gonna talk to Aleem. Like, isn't it Aleem's job to go out there and like perform? Isn't that why he's paid? Isn't that why he was drafted? And they are doubling. Like it is. You go back, you watch the game. Aiden's getting chipped consistently. It's happening. You may not want to believe it. Go back and watch the tape. He's getting chipped. And it's one of the reasons why like I can't be too hard on him because it's like I want him to be stronger at that because again, I'm pretty sure if I turn on TJ Watt's tape, if I turn on Micah Parsons tape, if I turn on Myles Garrett tape, like whoever it is, if I turn on one of these premier edge rushers, they're getting doubled too. They're getting chipped too, and they're still finding ways of being disruptive because more than likely they're not being chipped all game. So it's like you got to be able to win when you do have one-on-one matchups. You do got to find ways of getting hits on the quarterback. Even if, again, even if it doesn't lead into a sack, and the same is true for Aleem. Like when you have one-on-ones, win them. Period. That's what you were drafted for. That's what you're paid for. That is what you were paid to do. You are not, if you're not doing it, I'm going to look at you first because that's why you're here. Luke saying, I did watch the tape. He got a ton, and I mean a ton of one-on-ones, including the last Seahawks TD. And I'm not saying he didn't get one-on-ones. I'm saying that he got doubled. I'm saying he did get doubled. So this idea that he didn't isn't true. Like that, you saying you're calling cap on that's cap. If you're saying that he didn't get doubled, I'm calling cap. Because you clearly didn't see the snaps where he was getting chipped. And so that's one of those things where your like the rest of your defense has to help you. If they are going to allocate two offensive linemen, whether that's again a straight double where they're both just going to occupy you for the entire pass set, or simply being able to chip, like you have to be able to shed and get past both of the like get into that gap so that you can be able to make a play. It's really just that simple. Oh, Damien, I think I must have missed your question about the kicker. Let me go back up to it. Do the Lions need to draft a kicker next year? Absolutely not. Do they need to draft one? No. Do they still need to probably keep having competitions for one? Sure. But I don't like the idea of drafting kickers because there's no way of knowing if that's like I think there's been enough examples where even good college kickers don't always become great NFL kickers. And so I think the Lions and the rest of the NFL have continued to take this approach of like, hey, we will just continue to cycle through kickers. We will find kickers wherever we, can, whether that's the USFL, the XFL, undrafted free agents, whatever the case may be. I don't think you need to allocate draft capital to being able to find a kicker. Now, what I think your head coach might need to do, I do think he needs to probably sometimes take the foot off the gas a little bit and just take the three. Just take 3 points and at least put that in the mind of your opposing team. Like, go put that in the mind of your opponents that it's not always going to be like a fourth down, like they're going to go for it on every situation. I think going for it, I know he likes to go for it because he has enough faith in his offense, but I think there's nothing wrong with basically saying like, hey, we're going to get points right now because we're going to give you an opportunity, like so that you guys can get off the field, so that everybody can kind of recalibrate, get back in a good headspace, and so that you guys can go back out there later and be able to put up 6 points. Like this idea that you have to keep momentum going is just a little ridiculous in my opinion. So that's kind of my thing with that. Um, and Luca, this is like I'll agree with you on this, right? Myles Garrett, Aaron Donald all get doubled for real. And mainly like Aaron Donald's a little bit different because he obviously is rushing from the interior, so it's a little bit easier to double him, but they play through it. And so like that becomes like I'm not changing the expectation for Hutch, right? Like we all talked about how much he was getting doubled last year. So going into this year, it should be expected. You're going to get doubled. Did you go into the offseason and try to figure out how to beat double teams? Because you have to know how to do it. Other players, other high like high performing players in the NFL are doing it, and they're still putting up double digit sack numbers. They're putting up close to 20 sacks because they're learning how to beat double teams. Or again, maybe not beating a double team and then just being like, cool, but the first time you guys give me a one-on-one, I'm going to destroy my one-on-one. It's little things like that that Aiden still has to learn. Um, and again, I hate that this like kind of turned. I feel like this turned into like a me bashing Aiden thing, and it's not. It's not how I feel about it. I just like I do have higher expectations for him. The same way like I have high expectations for Aleem. I'm not going to not talk about the poor performance of Aleem because I have high expectations for him. The same with Alex. Like if Alex is going to continue to be recognized as a leader and be the guy that's starting, great. He's up there leading in tackles, and I think he's having good moments, but I feel like he's a player that can't afford to have mental lapses. Jack Campbell can have a mental lapse. Derek Barnes can have a slip up here and there because he's just now really starting for real. Alex can't. Alex, in my opinion, can't have those moments. I haven't even talked about it really. Jerry Jacobs can't afford to keep having these mess ups, in my opinion, as well. Because I feel like he's giving up a lot of like cushion in coverage. And it's weird to see because he was a guy that I used to like bite my nails about because I wasn't sure if he was going to get called for holding or pass interference. And now it seems like he's reverted all the way to the other end of the spectrum where it's like, all right, I would like Jerry to be a little more physical with these receivers coming out of their breaks. Um, and so I think there's just a little too much comfort when it comes to that in that regards. Yo, my guy Mike jumping in the chat saying, "Yo, Miko, what's good with you, Mike? Appreciate you coming by, catching the stream. Probably only going to be on here for another 20 minutes or so. I got off like on a whole tangent on like things that I wasn't happy about. Um, I want to go into some things that I am like I am excited about though, right? Like again, the season is still early. They're 1-1. There's no reason for any of us to act like they're 0-2 and like the season is lost. I think we've seen enough in the first two games to give us hope that like, you know what? If the Lions can continue to keep game planning the right way, if they can again, hopefully hold off the injury bug for a little bit longer, I think they can be all right. I think the way the offense is played, again, I don't know where I haven't been keeping track as far as like where they rank, this early in the season amongst the rest of the NFL, but I think they've played really well. I think Jared Goff has taken a huge leap. And for anybody that knows me, like I don't always give a ton of credit to Jared Goff. I tend to give a lot of credit to Ben Johnson, or I'll give credit to the pieces around him, his offensive line. But last game specifically, Jared Goff made some throws that I like literally had to give him a standing ovation for, right? He made some gutsy throws. He made some throws that a couple years ago, I don't think I would have expected him to make. There was a specific pass that he threw to Amon Ra where like Julian Love is right there. Like it's almost a battle for this could be a pick or this could be Amon Ra's. And that's a throw that I wouldn't have thought that Jared Goff would have thrown a couple years ago. Um, the way that he is operating with this offense gives me enough confidence to go in and be like, okay, when he's going into these games, I don't have to worry about him being, overly passive. Now, I got to see it happen a few more times on the road because Jared Goff at home is a completely different animal. Um, Ryan and I were like getting ready to do like our prop bet show over on Pride of Detroit, and we were originally going to try and place a bet on Jared Goff. And so we were like looking up like some of his stats. Guys, I encourage you to go look at that. His home versus away numbers are so drastically different. So drastically different. And I don't know what it is. I don't know why they're so drastically different, but it is crazy to see how he plays at home versus how he played on the road last year. But with that said, through two games at Kansas City at home against again tough competition, he's at least risen to the occasion. So I'm at least confident in his performance. I'm confident in what I've seen from Amon Ross so far throughout the season. Again, everyone talked about him having a big year. I think he's living up to that so far this year. Sam Laporta has been incredible. Like I'm really thrilled with what I'm seeing out of Sam. Not just from the simple fact of him like getting open, but I don't know if you guys saw it, the stiff arm he put on Bobby Wagner, like had me clutching my pearls. Like I was sitting there like, yo, that's a grown, like Bobby Wagner is a dude, right? Like instant Hall of Famer. Like, he's going into the Hall of Fame. One of the best linebackers I've seen in the NFL for a long time. And for him to just be like, yo, I'm gonna just straight up stiff arm you and try to get some more yards after this pass was incredible. So I think Sam is really starting to like kind of come into his own. We'll have to see again if Jared Goff continues to lean on him in the passing game. I think he will, because again, like Sam's taking these short routes and turning them into big gains. He's also running again some of these first down type of routes. So I'm excited about what he's able to do. I think the offensive line, even with some of the injuries, even with Taylor Decker not being in the lineup, and obviously, yeah, we're gonna have to see how things kind of adjust now that Vitae is also going to be out for a little while and Graham's gonna have to slide in. But for the most part, again, through 2 weeks, I feel like they've held up really well. They've kept Jared clean. I think, yes, he did get sacked twice? Yes, this past Sunday. So yeah, it's happened. He got sacked once in KC, but for the most part, I think they've kept him relatively clean. And I think is something that can continue going forward. So if the offense can continue to keep pace, I do think the defense is going to wake up eventually, because unlike in past years where I had issues with scheme or something of that nature, this year it is players. Like, it's just players not winning in opportunities where they should be winning. And I think I think that is going to get fixed, because again, I think it's going to get fixed without somebody having to get fired. I guess let me clarify that. That's going to get fixed without somebody having to get fired. I think going into Atlanta, they have a great opportunity to kind of wake up and um, get after Desmond Ritter, able to like limit Bijan, because Bijan's coming off of a really big game against Green Bay. You're getting opportunities to kind of showcase again what you're made of. And I think after losing that game, I would expect this defense to come out against Atlanta and just be a little more aggressive. I still got to dive into the tape of Atlanta and just kind of see what they've been doing well. Because I feel like they've won some close games so far, but I feel like if the Lions are gonna have to go up against them and they're expecting it to be a close game, I'm gonna lean on the Lions all the way. So that's just my opinion on that one. Um, Shout out to you, Antoine, in the chat. Giving a shout out to Luke, also saying, "What up, though, Miko? What's good with you, man? I appreciate you coming by." Um, Brandon saying, "Which unit is affected the most by all the injuries that we've had?" Um, Tend to look like we've been on a report on. Oh yeah, yeah. So I think we've had about like what 10 guys already on the injury report so far. Um, I would say the D line. Again, I think not having Josh Pascal, not having James Houston, and now you haven't had Julian Okwara since the season started. Like, you're running out of bodies to be able to rotate, especially on the edge. And that's something that I know was a big thing that some people pointed out last year about Aiden. Was like, hey, Aiden's playing way too many snaps. And so going into this year, it was like, oh, well, you had Kaminsky, you had, both Okwaras, you kept every D lineman, you kept every defensive edge that you had in camp. You kept them all. And we all felt good about like, oh, they can rotate these guys, and you should have a fresh body on any given, play or any given series. Now you're in a situation where like Aiden's gonna have to play a lot. He's gonna have to play a heck of a lot. Um, but again, that's not going to again make his job any easier. Um, Dan, I see your question here. Was Jerry's cushion scheme related? And it's possible. It's possible that it's scheme related. Again, the Lions do seem to be playing more zone. Specifically, it looks like they're playing like a lot of like cover 3 type zone. And again, sometimes you do give up more coverage so that you're basically trying to take away like the deep routes. But this is something I do. I agree with people where they have this criticism about AG, where it's like, hey, once you were getting picked apart underneath, why didn't you change? Why didn't you switch up things? Why didn't you go to a more press concept? And I don't know. And I other than this, and like it goes back to something I said earlier in the show. Up until those turnovers happened, the defense was doing their job. Seattle had 7 points going into the second half, right? They weren't killing you on the ground. They weren't necessarily killing you through the air, really. I think at one point in time in the second half, they were only like 2 for 7 on third down. The defense was working. And then you started giving up turnovers, and then your defense ended up being on the field a little bit more. And eventually, Geno just found his groove. And I don't know. I would love to say that it's as easy as just seeing it happen on a couple drives and just going to your players and saying, like, hey, start pressing. I would love to say it's that easy. We all know it's that easy in Madden. I don't know if it's that easy in a real game, but I do believe that that's something that should have been adjusted. Is once you started realizing that you were getting picked apart simply by underneath routes, yeah, something should have changed where, again, more press, maybe you stop dropping in cover 3, maybe you go to a more of a cover 2 look. Something of that nature needed to change so that you could start to get the short passing game under control because your defensive line wasn't helping you. So if they're not going to help you, you kind of got to start to help your secondary in some respect to be able to change how they're playing. Um, Shout out to my guy Marcus here. Marcus is a friend of the family, so appreciate you stopping by, Marcus. Uh, Saying great broadcast, Miko. Awesome talking points. Keep up the good work, man. I appreciate you supporting me, man. Really do. Um, Brandon saying just watch the Green Bay Atlanta game, and I think those teams are both even, but I believe Detroit can beat them both, even in Lambeau. And that's like I said, I gotta if the all 22 isn't out yet, because hopefully, like I plan on doing the same thing I did last week on the Pride of Detroit channel, where I do like a breakdown of everything that Atlanta does well, and then kind of talk about like how I think the Lions can like whether they should have an advantage or whether we should feel confident about that matchup. That's the goal. NFL Plus has been really slow about getting all 22 out this week. So if not, I'll have to go off the broadcast. And so I'll get a look at that. That'll probably be on my plate tonight as well as like again tomorrow, so I can get that video done. Not to mention Morgan and I are also going to do a breakdown of Sunday's game where we're going to highlight some of the most impactful plays. So more than likely, hopefully, we'll break down some of the turnovers and kind of explain why those happened and not who's to blame, but I guess again talk about the overall impact that they had on the game, kind of going forward. Um, Luke saying, "Oh my God, he did change and switch up those players, just didn't get it done." You're gonna have to show it to me. Like I saw, other than the like I said, other than the time that he went to man when they were like close to the red zone and they immediately got burned. He immediately got burned when he went to man. I think on back-to-back plays, and Gino ran it on them and basically almost picked up a. I think the second time he almost picked up a first down, but if it wasn't for a penalty, like he would have had it. So again, he's Aaron Glenn and Luke. I know I'm speaking specifically to Luke. This is a conversation between me and Luke. I don't know if anybody else is in Luke's camp on this one, but hey, between me and my brother right now, I know that you don't like people harping on AG right now, right? I know that you feel like he's shorthanded. The dude's in year 3. He's got to be able to put his players in position to succeed. And sometimes that's going to require him to get nitpicked a little bit. Like I said, I don't think he's the main reason they lost this game, but he's not exempt, right? When you start like I think the first thing I said after they lost this game was that this is a complete team loss. Everybody, everybody is going to get a piece of this pie as far as getting blamed. I talked about how great Sam Laporta was, right? Sam Laporta is the reason David Montgomery fumbles that football. Go back and watch that play. Sam does a terrible job on his block on Nwosu, which allows Nwosu to come free and put that hit on David Montgomery. So even the players that played well, right, as great as David Montgomery played, he still gives up that fumble. Like everybody, you can find blame and place it on everybody. No one's exempt. No one. Brandon saying, excellent show and appreciate the hard work and being able to talk so much. Not an easy thing to do when you're solo. I'm not even gonna lie to you, man. This is probably like that's probably the biggest thing that I realized after doing like my first show. Because for those of you who used to know, like I used to do this with my boy Scotty, and it was easy. Like when you have someone else to talk to, when Luke is on here, when I have guests, like that's the easy part. Uh I'm amazed and also thank you for the compliment. Um by the fact that I'm able to come on here and talk to you guys for close to an hour by myself. So appreciate you guys willing to listen to me ramble and just listen to just my voice for, like I said, almost an hour. Uh, Damian saying, you mentioned earlier that there were some players the Lions could look at. Who do you have in mind? Um, so specifically, like, so when David Montgomery went down, I immediately thought about Kareem Hunt, right? Kareem Hunt was somebody that just kind of came to mind as somebody who's a veteran back. And if the Lions are going to have this mindset of being like, hey, we don't want to give Jameer a ton of touches, then a guy like Kareem Hunt can do a lot of the same things, right? He can run, he can pass, he can be effective in the run game, he can be effective in the pass game. Um, and he can just kind of be utilized in that way and still be able to keep your run game effective. Um, I don't know how realistic this is, and I know this might sound like I hate to bring this hype train back up again. I'm still very much in favor of them trying to figure out a way to get Chase Young here because, again, the lack of pass rush here, you got to fix that. And I don't know if there's a pass rusher that's like sitting in free agency or that's unsigned somewhere that is going to be able to do that for you. So I think you might have to go out there and try and swing a trade for someone. And Chase Young is at the top of my list of just as a guy. Like I think Chase just get played in his first game, already has a sack and a half. Like picked up 1.5 sacks in his first game back, was dealing with injuries. Your defense, you're losing pass rushing options. So I would be I'd be in big favor of them going out and getting a guy like that. Dark Elf pointed out somebody that like I'm also a big fan of in Matt Ioannidis. Um, Again, someone who can like handle the interior defensive line, but he can also bounce on the outside. Melvin Ingram is an older defensive end, but again, if you're just looking for somebody to provide some depth, he's a good option. As mentioned, Kareem Hunt. See, me and Dark Elf are somewhat on the same page here. I'd even be fine with Kenyon Drake. Again, Kenyon Drake is someone who's been in the league for a while, but again, he has worked very well in running back committee. So again, he doesn't need to be your lead back. He doesn't need to be getting 20 plus touches a game, but he's somebody that you can kind of mix in. He can still be effective um, in that regard. Luke saying if the Lions add another offensive weapon, I will lose it. We need interior D line. Listen, man, they do. I just don't know outside of Matt Ioannidis is somebody that I was calling for back in training camp. And I still don't think he's signed. And so I just don't know. Like I said, Luke, I agree with you. They need to go out there and they need to like get some defensive line help. Um, Chase Young is the guy for me. Like I think he's the guy that you can bring in that will actually make an impact, and you're not just like bargain bin shopping. But it's going to require you to give up more than a sixth or a seventh, which is what I know you're saying. Like if they take a sixth or seventh, you'd be fine with Chase Young. I think they're gonna want more, right? They're probably gonna want a second round pick, probably multiple second round picks. But at this point, you need the help. And Chase Young is definitely an upgrade over Charles Harris. Like we can all agree on that, right? Like as a pass rusher, Chase Young is better than Charles Harris. Um, and I think it would allow Charles Harris to again become more of a rotational guy. You start to build out that depth, but then you have two capable starters on both sides of the D line. Um, Damian, you're mentioning Chris Wormley. That was another guy that I brought up during training camp and during the offseason. I'd be fine with that. Uh, B Taylor saying is Melvin Gordon too washed? He might be, but again, if you're just looking for a guy to spell Aiden for a couple snaps, do you really care? Right? Like at this point, like you just need somebody that like so that Aiden can be at his most optimal, in my opinion. Is like if Melvin Gordon can give you oh, you're talking about I'm sorry, I'm thinking Melvin Ingram. Melvin Gordon, the running back, yeah. Melvin Gordon, the running back, is probably washed because I don't think he's been able to stick anywhere. Like when you can't stick on practice squads, that's a good sign that you need to kind of start to transition out of the league. Daniel saying DC and AG talked about how much they had big plans to move Hutch around the line and not allow blockers to so easily double him or chip him. And that was last year. And it was last year they said that. Well, Daniel, I'll say this. Week 1, you saw it. Week 1, they moved him around. Now they're starting to have injuries on the D line. It's harder to move him around when you don't have other options to play on the outside, right? Like when you had Josh Pascal, when you had James Houston, when you had, you still have Kaminsky, but like when you had those guys, you had more flexibility. You go back to the KC game, they put Aiden on the inside, and that kept him from getting doubled, and he won a lot of those one-on-one matchups. They got into that game with Seattle. I don't know exactly like what point in the game James Houston got hurt. I know it was on kickoff, but again, it takes away that ability to kick Aiden inside because you need somebody on the outside. And if Charles Harris is getting a breather and you already have Romeo on the other side, you're not putting Kaminsky on the outside over Aiden. You're going to put Aiden on the outside and you're going to put Kaminsky on the inside. So I do think like their how they want to shuffle their defensive line has been impacted by injury, which again goes back to what I was saying and what Luke is kind of, also talking about as well. This is why you have to go out and you have to go find some more, edge or just D line depth for this team so that you can kind of get back to doing what you want to do defensively. Um, Big Black Coffee saying, I wonder when Broderick Martin will be activated. Can't be worse than what we're getting up front soon. And I'm not saying that as like someone with inside information. I'm simply saying I don't think the Lions are going to allow Benito Jones and even somebody like Aleem to continue to put out performances where they're not having an impact on the game when they have someone like Isaiah Buggs, when they have someone like Broderick Martin. I don't think they'll be afraid to do that. Again, especially if it's costing them games. If it's costing them games, they will pull the trigger on that fairly quickly. Maybe not on both, maybe not at the same time, but Broderick, I would if I just kind of have a feeling, right? If that interior D line continues to play this poorly, you're going to see Broderick get activated fairly soon before the bye. And if not before the bye, definitely after. Because if they're going to play that bad leading into the bye, I would not be surprised if the Lions, again, try to shake things up, try to get guys' attention, and they start activating guys like Broderick. They start activating Isaiah Buggs. I feel like they need to activate Isaiah Buggs this week. I know why I know some people have had questions about that too. And this is the only reason I can say I can kind of believe why they haven't activated Buggs is that the two running backs that they've gone against so far this season are very athletic running backs. Kenneth Walker, again, this is a Lions focused podcast for sure, but I'm also a Spartan fan. Kenneth Walker did some amazing things in that game, like literally put the D line in a spin cycle on a number of situations where he just had them looking confused. And luckily it didn't turn into like big gains, but there were a number of times where it's like, oh, that should be a tackle for loss. And then like you see him kind of like start to kind of get closer to the line of scrimmage, pick up a yard or two. And fortunately, a linebacker or a safety comes down and gets the tackle. But it's like, yeah, he should have been down behind the line of scrimmage. I think Isaiah Buggs doesn't have that lateral quickness. And so instead of putting him out there and allowing your defensive line to be exploited because he doesn't have the lateral quickness that you're looking for, I think that's why they've continued to keep him inactive. But again, Benito and Aleem aren't doing a ton. And if they're going to continue to do that, I'm perfectly fine with them pulling Benito and giving Isaiah Buggs an opportunity just to see if they can start to get more push in the pass rush department. But yeah, Perry, I agree. Walker is a good running back. And as for your question, are there any other defensive tackles from other teams' practice squads? Nobody that comes to mind, right? And I'm sure the Lions could find somebody. And I think as things currently stand, I think they have one more open spot on the roster that they need to fill. I'm hoping that it's a defensive lineman because I don't think they've signed one yet. So we'll have to wait and see. Again, at this point in time, I think you just need bodies to help you get to a point where you can start to have that defensive line rotation that you were hoping that you would be able to have at the beginning of this season. But yeah, guys, I think that's going to do it for tonight. Been on here for an hour. I really do appreciate all of you guys coming by, being able to showing support for the channel, even though, like I said, I know I haven't been streaming nearly as often as I was when I first started, but appreciate you guys continuing to show support over here. Appreciate all the support that you guys have been giving over on the Pride Detroit channel. I see a lot of the same people over there commenting on videos, so I appreciate you guys showing support and showing love over there as well. But yeah, that's going to do it for this video. I'm going to answer this last question by Big Black Coffee because he basically got it in like at the buzzer, and it's an Alex Anzalone question, so I don't mind answering that one. He says, how do you feel about Anzalone getting so much playing time? He's so bad, but the Lions love him. He's already leading the league in missed tackles amongst linebackers. So I said it earlier in the show, right? I think Jack is playing well. And I think if Jack continues to play well, the Lions are going to have to take notice, and what the first person that's going to lose snaps is going to be Alex. And it's mainly I gotta give a lot of credit to Jeremy over at Pride Detroit for saying this. Alex has the most snaps amongst the linebackers. So if anybody's going to have their snaps dialed back, it's going to be him. So if he continues to lead the league in missed tackles, if he continues to make mistakes, not reading, the offense correctly and dropping into coverage when he should be coming up and run support, yeah, he's going to start to see his production or his amount of time on the field dialed back. I believe in the lights in favor of that for Jack Campbell. But yeah, everybody, that's going to do it. Appreciate you guys coming by. Be sure to hit the like button on your way out. If you're new to this channel, please be sure to hit the subscribe button. It really does help out the channel. And yeah, I will see you guys either on the next time I stream over here or in the next video that I have over on Pride of Detroit. I appreciate you all. I hope you all have a great night.